All right, simulations. Number one, same as the multiple choice. Be familiar with the format and the functionality. Get used to what the simulations look like, how you fill them out. A big part of the simulation practice is seeing the variety in the types of questions that the examiners can ask. The more you see, the more of that variety you experience, the less likely it is the examiners can surprise you on exam day. Some things about the simulations in terms of how you should work through them. For financial and for audit, you're going to face off against 7 tasks. For regulation, 6. And we'll come back to business a little later. When you look at these tasks, you get to see all 6 or all 7, and you can work them in any order you please, just as the multiple choice. So a good idea is when you first get to the simulations, take a quick look at each task. See what they're asking for. Gauge how long it's going to take you to do that. Also, determine which one is your strength. Honestly, if you feel like one of the simulations is something you're very comfortable with, I'd answer that one first. Remember, all about positively attaining those 75 points. We like to say in America, you go for the low-hanging fruit. Meaning, if you go to an orchard and you're picking fruit, and if I handed you a basket and said, I need you to pick 75 pieces of fruit as fast as you can and as efficiently as you can, which ones do you pick first? The ones that are lowest on the tree, right? Easiest to reach, don't have to stretch, you don't need a ladder. That's the low-hanging fruit. And the same is true on the CPA exam. Take the easy points that are offered. Answer the easy questions. It's still going to add towards your score and hopefully get those 75 points put in your basket. So, go through the tasks, determine how much time to allocate to each, and, just as the multiple choice, leave nothing unanswered. No penalty for guessing, so make sure, even if that means take an extra minute at the end of each simulation task, to read it one more time and make sure you answered everything. And again, use that budget. If you did things effectively, you should have a little more than an hour left on the regulation exam for your simulations. And for financial and audit, probably more like an hour and a quarter to an hour and a half. Now, if you end up having more, that's wonderful. But that's a good minimum. Think of it this way. If I have 75 to 90 minutes for financial, and I've got 7 tasks, that means I have, about 10, 12, 13 minutes, and that's about right. You should find that most tasks will be between 8 to 12 minutes or so to complete, so you understand why that's the right kind of a budget to have left. Let's take a look at a great example. So this is taken from our financial portion of the course. Now, one of the things I tell Becker instructors all the time is there's one thing you don't do in class, ever. You never say, that won't be on the exam, because we don't know, right? I told you the AICPA puts a lot of items on that list. Now, certainly we're going to tell you things we believe are more likely or less likely, or we have found that certain items have been more frequently tested or less frequently tested, and that's part of what we emphasize in our course. But what I can say with a pretty good degree of confidence is that one of those financial simulations is going to look something like this one, because they're going to ask you to prepare journal entries. Now, here's what's good about this. This is what you need to understand is different about the CPA exam. If you were working on an assignment, if you were working on journal entries at your job for that matter, it's right or wrong, right? Either the journal entry's right or the journal entry's wrong. On an exam, that's how my professors would grade them. At work, that's what your boss will say, right? If you get it wrong, it's wrong. If you told him, well, I got the accounts right, I just put the wrong number in, yeah, it's wrong. On the CPA exam, don't forget who grades it. A computer. Computers don't think that way. All a computer can do is say, okay, here's where you put in an account title. Is that an account title that belongs in the answer? If yes, you get some points. If no, you don't. Is that amount in the debit column a correct amount to be used in this journal entry? If yes, more points. If no, none. But what that means is, with a journal entry, even if you get the numbers wrong, but you get all the account titles right, you're going to get some of the points. If you get the amounts and you're not sure about the account titles, still going to get some of the points. And don't forget, what's a score you're looking for? 75. So on any given question, I look at this and I go, if I can get these journal entries 3/4 right, I'm in pretty good shape. Now, if I can get them better than that, hey, that's adding some cushion. But at least that's an important thing to keep in mind. Most people would say, yeah, I can get most journal entries 3/4 right. Good. And then that's going to serve you well in the exam. But keep that in mind for every simulation you face. You're always trying to get that 75. Now, here's the other good news. If you think about a journal entry, let's just use as an example that you knew the journal entry had to have a debit or a credit to a fixed asset account. How many different titles could I use? Fixed assets, property, plant, and equipment, PP&E, building, machinery, land. I mean, I keep going, and it's entirely possible every one of those would be correct. Well, the computer doesn't want to grade 17 possible answers, and it certainly doesn't want to evaluate if you type in one and it says, I'm not sure. How do they avoid that? They're going to give you a list. Anytime you're typing in numbers, typically those will be fill in the blank, but a lot of times when you're choosing words, they're going to give you a list of options to choose from. When they give you a hint, take it. I look at this and I say, oh good, I'm going to read through this entire list of potential accounts. Maybe that'll help spark something. Maybe you weren't sure about what the journal entry needs to look like, but once you read through the possible accounts, you say, now I remember. Great. If the examiners are willing to do you a little favor, take it. But that's what you're going to see. So get used to that. That's part of getting used to the functionality and the format. Now, some other things to point out, again, with the red boxes. There's that clock. It keeps counting down. Over on the far left, you'll notice that simulations are set up with a series of tabs. If you've used Microsoft Excel, similar to that. The first tab, the far left, is the one that you actually need to complete for the points. There's typically going to be 3 tabs. The first will be that. The second will be the authoritative literature. On any simulation, you're allowed to use the research tool. You don't have to, and bear in mind, all things take time, so it's up to you if you want to. And then the last tab is help. It's the general instructions, and frankly, with enough practice, you probably would never need to read them. Every so often, though, there's going to be a 4th tab. Usually it's called information, might say facts or something similar. That's usually going to happen if they have a lot of information to convey in the question, and it would just make there'd be too much on the one page. So what they'll do is they'll put a separate tab, and that introduces one of the most important tools to get used to. It's up here, split screen. You can split the screen vertically or horizontally, and what we recommend to students is if you're faced with a question where you have the facts on one tab and the question on another, use the split screen. Put one on one side, one on the other, and that way you don't have to keep flipping back and forth. You can easily reference the facts in the question as you're working and actually filling in your answer. You'll still have that mighty fine calculator, and now you have this spreadsheet. And if you thought the calculator was bad, I'm not even going to show you the spreadsheet. Again, just to see what the tools are like, it's not Excel. It's not even close. It has very basic functionality. But the best way to get familiar with it and decide if it's something you would like to use on exam day, try it out now. That way you're not trying it out on exam day. All right, let's take a look at another quick example. And I love to show this one because it emphasizes that sometimes simulations are just, well, we use the word window dressing. It's the kind of thing where maybe someone puts some very nice curtains on the window to make it look much nicer than it really is inside. So here, boy, it looks like a simulation. Look at all these blanks. No, it isn't. It's multiple choice. You see, each of these blocks, you have 3 options. I look at this and say A, B, and C, and that was nice. They didn't even bother making a D. So the odds are better than a regular multiple choice question. See, all they're asking here, if you're curious, is for each of these activities, does it go in the operating, investing, or financing section of the statement of cash flows? Now, I look at this, again, how hard is it to get all 10 right? Probably easy to make a mistake, right? 75 though, remember that. So here, if I can get 8 of these right, I'm doing pretty good. If I can get 9 right, I'm doing excellent. If you can get all 10 right, fantastic. So sometimes simulations won't take as much time because they're really just a bunch of multiple choice. Now you might ask yourself, well, why didn't they just do this as a multiple choice question? And they could, but if they wanted to do this, it would take 10 multiple choice to do it. They only have 90. Instead, this takes 1 task. So it makes it a little more efficient for them to test this concept. All right. Now, when you look at financial and audit and regulation, all but one of the tasks will be what I just talked about, will be full-blown simulation problems. But one of the tabs is different. One of the tasks is research. It literally is your ability to find in the authoritative literature, and quickly for financial, that's going to be the FASB codification, basically US GAAP. For audit, that's the US audit standards, as well as attestation, compilation, review, ethics, a variety of sources. And for regulation, that's the United States Internal Revenue Code, basically the US tax code. Your job, based on the question, is not to answer the question. Instead, it's to find where in the literature is the answer for that question. So, point number 1, read the question very carefully. Here's the problem. We're going to show you in a moment a screenshot from financial. But if you've worked with the FASB codification at all, you know that any given piece is a 4-part number. It's a 4-part code. It has a topic, a subtopic, a section, and a paragraph number. Here's the bad news. Let's say you work through the simulation and you decide that the right answer is topic 505, subtopic 10, section 20, paragraph 9. And the right answer is all of that except it's paragraph 10. Here's the bad news. That's wrong, even though you were this close. So it's important to really read the question because sometimes you'll get to the right part of the literature, the correct area, but exactly what the question's asking for is how you determine if it's paragraph 9 or paragraph 10. Second, this is another wonderful place to use the split screen because you're going to have where you enter the section, basically enter your answer, and the authoritative literature, as you saw earlier, is a separate tab. Third, have a strategy. This is why we want you to practice with the research questions. Figure out how you're going to attack them. Is it you're going to read the question and write down any keywords, words you think are going to be good for searching. Decide how many different searches you may try before you'll start hunting down the answer. In the United States, we'd say go Google it. I know here I've been taught a little bit during my visit here to China. I think it's I'm going to look at my someone here in the room with me. Is it Baidu? Is that the search engine? Baidu. Okay. So same thing. It's a keyword search, right? You type in one or more words, and based on that search, it's going to try to find the website that best matches it. Well, here, same thing. You're going to type in certain words, and it's going to do its best to find where in the authoritative literature the best match is. But there's more than one way to search. All right, number 4, make sure you give yourself a time limit. This is still just one of the 6 or one of the 7 tasks, which means it doesn't deserve any more time than any other. 5 to 10 minutes is probably a good idea. Now, I will tell you, sometimes a well-practiced student can pick up some time here. They can do the research question relatively quickly. And number 5, I know there's a lot of information here. What I really want to point out, though, is 2 things. 1, there's more than just search. When you first use the literature search tool, what we find from a lot of our students is they see the box and they see the search button next to it. And they, again, think of an internet search engine and say, oh, okay, I know how to use that. Great. And they ignore that next to the search button is search within, which means I want to search for those words, but only in one specific area of the literature or one specific section. And you basically click that section before you press search within. And then there's a host of other tools under the advanced search, and that's a clickable link. Here's the problem. Let's say the question being posed, and I believe this is still in our software as one of the practice questions. Your client would like to know if US GAAP requires a company to disclose cash flow per share, like earnings per share. Now the answer is no, it doesn't. But where is the answer? Well, you might say, okay, I want to find, I assume I can look for cash flow per share. So I type that in. Here's the problem. If I type that in the regular search, here's what it does. It says, I'm looking for the words cash and flow and per and share. How many times do you think the word cash appears in GAAP? It will probably find the right answer, but it will probably find a whole lot of wrong answers too. The search is a little too general. Now, if you use advanced search, that's where you can tell it, no, I don't want you to look for each word. I want you to look for the whole phrase. I want you to look for cash flow per share all together. You'll be amazed as you practice with some of these. If you type in the exact same search with search, you may get 200 hits, 200 possible answers. Use the right advanced search, that may cut down to 2 or 3. So understanding how these work is critical. And now's the time to practice. Try them. See how they work. See what difference they make when you use different searches. And become familiar with the authoritative literature. If you haven't yet, particularly for financial, there's a video covering how the codification, the FASB codification is set up. Take advantage of it. Watch that. But practice is what's going to make perfect here. Practice with these research tools and become familiar with how the literature is set up. So here's an example research task, this one from financial, and that's all it is. It's going to give you a brief question, what someone wants to know. In this case, it said that they want to know if comprehensive income, how that's dealt with on interim financial statements. And so the name of the game for you is, okay, I know what it's asking. I now have to decide, what am I going to search for? What phrase? Our student here is trying comprehensive income. That's pretty general. Maybe an advanced search would help. Maybe you want to find the phrase comprehensive income and you want it somewhere near the word interim. Try different combinations. But there you can see search, search within, and the advanced search as well. And then you see also our recommended use of the split screen so that when you find your answer, you can enter it over here. Now the exam will give you one small aid. It will tell you if it's appropriately formatted. For example, the topic, which is the first part of the code, is either a 3-digit or a 4-digit number. So at least if you enter it in wrong, it will tell you that's not properly formatted. So you get that warning. That at least helps in case you mix the digits up or you misentered the number in the wrong box. That at least can be a small aid for you. And then the written communication. I realize probably most of you sitting there, English is not your first language. And as such, the fact that part of this exam is going to test your English writing skills may be a little daunting. Well, let me tell you something. It is for a lot of American students too. Now, for them, it may just be that they don't feel like writing is their strength. They just don't feel like they're good writers. Either way, I want you to understand that written communication on the CPA exam is probably not that similar to the kind of communication you're going to do in your work. It's not the kind of correspondence you're going to write. Remember, the purpose here is to get that 75. It's to get the score you want. So, we're trying to write an answer. In fact, probably better to say, we're trying to build an answer to maximize those points. And BEC is the only section that has writing, and it's 15% of your score. All right? So here are some things to keep in mind. Number one is keep your response relevant and on topic, ideally trying to use appropriate vocabulary for the question. But one of the things I like to tell our students is that the grading is on 3 ingredients. The more you use those three ingredients in your answer, you're basically taking choice away from the grader. The human being, the only part of the exam that's at least partly graded by a person, don't give them any reason to not give you the points. And the first of those is, did you address the question? That's relevance. So if the question says, your client would like you to write a letter explaining the following, and they say, we have 3 questions. How should you design your answer? How should you build it? Well, I'd look at that and say, well, my client asked 3 questions. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a paragraph for each of those questions. I'll start with a brief introduction. I'll have a brief conclusion. How can they argue you didn't address the question? How can you argue that your answer isn't relevant? You see, by just building the answer around the question, you've now made it easy for the grader to give you some of those points. Second, outline your response first. Don't just start typing. Boy, is that easy to do. You say, oh, I know how I want to answer it, and you just take off. Better idea. After you read the question, use the scratch cards you have and just sketch out your answer. Nothing fancy. Maybe take 30 seconds and just outline, first I want to talk about this, then this, second paragraph, this, and so on. That'll help you with the second element that's graded. Did the reader understand you? Basically, could the reader follow your logic, your reasoning? Again, I like to say it as, if this is about what's in each paragraph, this is about how you connect those paragraphs together. Make it logical. And if you lay it out in advance, it will be. You'll have it in your mind exactly how you want to weave the intro into the supporting paragraphs into the conclusion. Third, I'm going to put 3 and 5 together here. Use proper paragraphs and don't use an abbreviated presentation. And what that means is, most often, they're either going to ask you to provide a letter or a memo. So it should be written like one of those, which means sentences, paragraphs. Don't just use a list of bullet points. That's not going to get you any points. Remember, the AICPA is not interested in the content so much as the style, in the sense of they want to see how well you communicate, not that you necessarily have the right answer. So don't go for an abbreviated presentation. Show them you're a good writer and get those points. Finally, use correct spelling, grammar, punctuation. Well, here's a couple things. That's the third element of grading, right? I've talked about 2. We have, did you address the question? Could the reader understand your logic? The third is it well written? There's one good thing, though. Be short, succinct. I'm a believer that the more you write, the more chances you have to make a mistake. So don't. Keep it short. Get your points across as quickly and efficiently as you can. That means shorter sentences, keep it straightforward, and that makes it a little easier because it's less likely you're going to make a mistake. And if it's a shorter answer, it's more likely that you could review it and find a mistake. Whereas if it was too long, that would become challenging. By the way, another reason to keep it short, remember I told you there's a human being that's going to read these, a lot of them, and they're not paid well. From what I'm told, it's kind of a volunteer position. When CPAs say they volunteer, I'm going to grade. Do them a favor, keep it short, right? They're going to be much happier to read a short, succinct, to-the-point answer. This whole thing is about give them every reason you can to give you those points. Now, if you don't believe me, and a lot of students, I tell you, when I explain this is how it's graded, they look at me funny. They can't believe that's exactly right. In fact, they can't believe that providing incorrect information doesn't affect their score. It doesn't. And if you don't believe me, here's an example. It's this reminder. The bold print, that explains how it's graded. Read it over. It reiterates the exact points I just made about did you address the question? Did it help the intended reader? And then talking about punctuation and grammar, as well as saying don't use an abbreviated presentation. Now, one other thing to make use of is that we're going to provide you our solution. Now, please understand, we're giving you kind of the perfect answer. Does that mean on the exam, you'd look, if this was the answer, that if you didn't say every single thing in this answer, you would lose points? No, not necessarily. We're trying to demonstrate hitting everything that was addressed in the question as thoroughly as we could, but still keeping it to a somewhat succinct length. Bear in mind, I told you earlier that for BEC you should have something on the order of an hour to maybe an hour and a quarter left when you get to the end. You're going to face 3 of these writing questions on business. So 20 to 25 minutes per. So understand, it's realistic if you say, well, I'm going to spend maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes reading the question, kind of laying out my answer. Still got about 20 minutes to write. Maybe that's 20 minutes. That might even be a little bit much for 20 minutes. So don't be too daunted by the suggested solution. Remember, as long as you write an answer that is on point, relevant, addresses the question fully, is logically laid out, and is well written, you're going to get most of those points. Now, I've already hit on time management a few times, and I'm going to do it once more. One of the ways you can improve your time management beyond just being conscientious of the clock is through practice. In fact, push yourself. I tell my students regularly, if you're going to work through the multiple choice, try to go a little bit faster than you're comfortable. If you do it right, if you can work the questions on an average faster than, say, 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and you get used to that, when you get to the real exam, you're going to feel like you have much more time than you expected. And that's the best possible scenario. So push yourself. I mentioned, have a plan. Write it out. I would honestly say that on that scratch card you receive when you walk into the testing room, that's the first thing I'd write down is your time budget. And I said that there's different difficulties. So don't be shy. Take the easy ones, the quick ones first. It's all about getting those 75 points. Now, I talked about this somewhat indirectly, but let me at least bring you a quick summary as we look at the 4 parts of the exam. For financial and audit, you can use a rough estimate of about 50 minutes, maybe 55, for each 30-question testlet. Okay? So that's kind of saying, yep, makes sense with 90 seconds to 2 minutes per question, and that should leave you an hour and a quarter to an hour and a half for your 7 simulations. For regulation, because it's shorter, it's only a 3-hour exam, there's only 24 questions per testlet, so we're talking more 35 to 40 minutes here with, again, an hour to an hour and a quarter for your simulations. And if I lean back a little bit, business is comparable because the multiple choice is the same as regulation, and you still have that same leftover time to work on your writing questions. And this is one of the ways you could do it. Literally, put a little box at the top of that card and write out your schedule. Say, yep, I'm giving myself a 50-minute budget for each of the multiple choice testlets, and if I do that, I have 90 minutes left for my simulations. But there is actually one more thing I'd add to this, if you are willing to indulge me. About here, maybe here, I'd budget a break. Understand that on the exam, you are only allowed to take a break between testlets. So you have to plan that way. And a break is not just a minor event in the CPA exam. You actually have to leave the testing room. In effect, basically, you have to kind of log out of the testing room to take that break. But if you want to use the restroom, if you brought a snack with you, if you just want to stretch your legs, that's the only way you can. And I would say that as much as you may want to, and say, nope, I'm going to sit there, I'm going to just stick to it for 4 solid hours. All I need to ask you is, how do you feel if you sit in front of a computer and don't move for 4 hours? I don't feel real good. By the 3rd hour, my back starts to hurt a little bit. My arms and my shoulders may be cramping from clicking the mouse. My hands hurting. At the very least, it's harder for me to focus. Don't you think it's a better idea, maybe right here when you're facing that last hour and a half, when you really need to be on point for those simulations? That's a good time to take that break. Maybe just 5 minutes. Even if you say, no, I don't need to go to the bathroom. I don't need to eat. Okay. It's still a reason to stretch your legs. Stretch that, stretch out that back, stretch out those arms, take a deep breath. Refocus. Kind of recenter your mind for the home stretch to get through those last questions. So I would budget time, because one of the ways the clock works is when you start the clock, nothing stops it. So that includes breaks, and that's why I think it's really a good idea to feel comfortable that it's part of your budget. All right. Now, if you're watching this and you've already sat for one or more parts, this is going to be old news. You'll just smile perhaps as I say some of these things. But if you haven't, I want to give you a little bit of a glimpse into what it's like going to a CPA exam testing center, wherever you may end up going. I know that a lot of candidates, I've been told, go to Guam or Guangdong, I believe it's pronounced, but or you may visit the United States to do your test. In any case, the experience will be similar because they're all run by the same company, a company called Prometric. And they are basically required by the AICPA to conduct the exam in a very consistent manner everywhere. So, I don't need to know where you're going. I know what you're going to feel like when you get there. Now, if you want to read more, I highly encourage you, if you have not done so, to go to the NASBA website. That's NASBA.org. Or you can go to the AICPA's website as well to find the CPA Exam Candidate Bulletin. If you have questions like, well, what kind of identification do I have to bring with me? What will I have to go through when I first get there? How long till I receive my scores? All those kinds of questions are covered in this document. It's freely available. It's a PDF. I definitely would grab a copy. But let's talk about taking your exam. First, and incredibly important, get there early. They recommend at least 30 minutes. I'd do more. I'd get there an hour early if it were up to me. At the very least, build in some cushion. If you're in a place that is subject to traffic, give extra time for that. Now, if you're on Guam, probably that's not as big an issue, but regardless of where you take it, get there early. Bring your identification. Now, again, I suspect most of you are likely Chinese citizens, and I know that doesn't allow you to take advantage of the AICPA's international testing centers, but if you were, that means you'd have to have a passport for that. Otherwise, it's more generically 2 ID forms, one of which must be a photographic ID. Again, that candidate bulletin will give you a much more comprehensive and complete listing so you know exactly what you want to pack to go. Storage. Notice the emphasis on the word small. When you go to the testing center, you're not allowed to bring very much with you into the testing room. In fact, I like to say you get to bring you get to bring your ID, and that's about it. So if you bring a snack, a granola bar, a piece of fruit, if you bring other documents, if you bring whatever, they're going to have you secure that in a small locker when you get there. They're very serious about security. They are going to subject you to a metal detection. It's a handheld wand. They're also going to biometrically fingerprint you each time you walk into or out of the testing room. Now, a lot of folks have looked at this and said, you've got to be kidding me. This is worse than the airport. Why is that? Why is the AICPA so sensitive? Cheating. Believe you me, when the CPA exam was paper and pencil, as secure as they tried to make it, people still found ways to cheat. So yeah, the AICPA is incredibly serious about their security. So don't be surprised at the depths of that security when you get there. You don't get scratch paper. You're going to get what's called a note board. It's a piece of paper that's been laminated, and you'll get a fine point dry erase pen to use. Now, you're not limited to one board. You can turn it in to get another if you need it. But again, that's a little different than scratch paper. If I were you, I might go get a piece of paper laminated and just get used to using that. You're going to receive a code when you arrive at the testing center. It's basically the code that lets you start the test when you first sit down at the computer. But what I'll point out here is that when you schedule your exam, let's say it's financial or audit, which is a 4-hour test, what you'll notice is your scheduled time will be 4.5 hours long. And the reason is you get 10 minutes for the introductory section, then you have 4 hours for the exam, and then you have an additional 20 minutes after the exam to complete a survey and finish. Note, the part where you're actually taking the test is still just the 4 hours. You might say, okay, fine. Word of warning. And I only mention this because NASBA has made a point of mentioning it to Becker. They've had some students sitting at the computer with their noteboard and trying to use that 10 minutes to write down as much information as they can remember before they start their test. kind of a note, make it a page full of notes. That's a dangerous strategy. And I highly recommend beyond something simple like your time budget, don't do it. And here's the reason why. If you don't start the exam itself within that 10 minutes, you don't get to take the exam. They've actually had to eject students from the testing center for failing to complete the login and introduction within the 10 minutes that's required. So please, keep note of that as you sit down and understand what that full 4.5 or 3.5 hours represents. Now, I would imagine many of these are no surprise, but just some of the items that are specifically prohibited at the testing center or at least in the testing room. Any papers or books, but that includes maybe if you bring a bag or a purse, can't bring that in. Food, drink, tobacco products, any talking or communicating with anyone else in the testing room, your phone, a PDA, any other computer device, all of those items are prohibited. Now, if at some point the AICPA happens to see this video and they think, well, he's rather cruel. I do. I will fully admit that I make fun of the AICPA, and I feel like we're all entitled. They write the exam. We should be allowed to make fun of them. But I will give them credit when due, and I really think they've done a marvelous job with this. One of the big complaints they received during the first few years of the computerized exam was the turnaround time on grading. The grading was irregular in terms of some folks it was fairly quick, some folks much longer, but it still took too long for a lot of people. And so the AICPA listened and said, here's what we're going to do. Bear in mind that the exam is given 2 out of every 3 months on the quarters. So right now, as I'm sitting here taping this, it's September. That's a closed month. So the third quarter of the year, July and August, the exam is administered, but not in September. It will again be administered in October and November, but not in December. So you have about 60 days of testing each quarter. Well, if you take it in the first 20 days, within 11 business days after that period, the scores will be released for those candidates. If you're in the second period, which is 21 to 45, no later than 6 business days. And the busiest time, which is the last couple of weeks of a window, they say by the time the window is closed, plus 6 business days. And the credit here? The AICPA has not missed a deadline that I'm aware of. So they've held to this, and I think that's admirable, and I know the students appreciate a much more reliable and timely release of grades. As we reach the conclusion, I'd like to finish with a brief discussion of, well, what comes next as you think back on this presentation, hopefully after you've passed all 4 parts of your exam, and you say, that's great, okay, now what? I want to get my license. The whole point of taking this was so I could put CPA after my name. What's important to remember is that you're ultimately trying to build the 3 E's to complete your license. Now, if you pass the exam, well, certainly you've taken care of that E. It's very likely you have completed or are close to completing the second, which is education. Now, the reason I say it that way is that most U.S. jurisdictions require 120 hours to sit for the exam, but require 150 hours in order to become licensed. But I know that many students will have 150 before they even take the exam. The third is relevant work experience. Now, that can be done concurrently, before, or after you take the exam. But what's important for all of this is that each state and jurisdiction, each U.S. state, sets its own rules, and therefore each state tends to be a little bit different. So as you decide to which jurisdiction you're applying to, whether it's Guam or Colorado or Washington or wherever it may be, you understand the specifics of each of these 3, particularly these 2. Now, just to give you a sense of it, I've picked those 3 states here, Colorado, Maine, and then the jurisdiction of Guam. And you'll notice that they each have an experience requirement, but it varies. Some say years, some will put it in terms of number of hours. Some states also require an ethics exam prior to licensure. Some don't. The good news is most of those ethics exams are open book. It's basically you review some materials and you complete an online exam. It's not very challenging, but it's important, certainly. Ethics are part of the cornerstone of the accounting profession and the U.S. CPA. Now, once you get your license, then as I do, you have to continue receiving what they call continuing professional education, CPE. And each state sets their rules in terms of what that has to be. Now, this hopefully will be a little ways down the road for you, but just so you're aware of it, you do have to complete it if you want to maintain an active CPA license in that state. Most states review CPE each 2-year period, some 3. Most states will require an annual amount of, or I should say a biennial amount of 80 hours. And then they'll set some additional requirements. It may include how many hours each year. So I'm going to give you my example. I live in a state, Pennsylvania. My rules are I have to get 80 hours every 2 years, but at least 20 in each year. So I can do 40-40, I can do 20-60, but I can't do all 80 in 1 year. They may specify what format you have to take your continuing education. Again, Pennsylvania mandates certain courses or a certain amount of those hours have to come from live in-class courses, not online or self-study. And the state may lay out specific subjects you have to include in your continuing education. Once again, I have to take at least 8 hours of tax, and I have to take 16 hours of audit and attestation. But again, it's important that you check your state once you become licensed to understand their CPE requirements. One piece of good news, most states exempt you from this when you first become licensed. So if you became licensed, let's say, in 2015, and that state was going to review CPE at the end of 2016, you wouldn't likely have to worry about it because they usually exempt brand new licensees. But again, check your state. And we've reached the end. If you have more questions, certainly I encourage you to speak to CDL. You'll have your contacts there that have probably a lot more knowledge about issues specific to you and your candidacy. But I give everyone my email, anyone I teach, and you just joined that group, and I'm very happy you did. So if you have a question for me, there's my email. And you can also visit Becker's website. One thing you may find particularly useful there is we have a summary of each state's rules. It's not every question that you need answered necessarily, but it does provide a nice overview if you're curious at looking at several different states. And that's the end. So, once again, my name is Michael Brown. It's been my pleasure to be with you. I hope that you have found this to be very useful. I hope that these strategies will be useful both as part of your preparation for the exam and some strategies you can use on exam day and feel perfectly comfortable and come out the other side with that all-important 75. I wish you the best of luck, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.